Now back to the show. This is AM 650's The Law Show.
Welcome back to the program. David Hobbs and Ian Giroday from hobbsgiroday.com are with us in studio on this episode of The Law Show here on AM 650. Gentlemen, we're talking about a pretty nasty group of human beings. We're talking about rip-off artists, con artists, and fraudsters, people who professionally prey on elderly, vulnerable people, our parents. So there's no criminal behavior yet provable. So we can't call the cops. They've got too much else on their plate. Ian and David have both recommended, well then, obviously the next bit of recourse you have is the public guardian and trustee. And both of you have said that person or an agent of the public guardian could come out and visit your parent to determine a competency level. Correct, David?
That's correct. I mean, the public guardian and trustee is firstly a corporation at the top. The lieutenant governor appoints a person to represent the public guardian and trustee, so we think of it as the individual,
right,
the appointed person.
But it's a body, right?
It's a body.
Right.
It has an appointed person, and that person appoints deputies.
Right.
So it's operates under a statute. Fundamentally, they act as executors, they act as administrators, they act as trustees, they act as attorneys, they act as litigation representatives. So they play roles filling empty spaces where there is no individual to act in these roles for a given person.
Right.
And they're governed by the Trustee Act, just like any trustee in terms of investing money and those sorts of things.
Right.
But they also have investigative powers, and the investigative powers is where this discussion comes in terms of visiting people and investigating situations
Right.
to see whether or not something is going on that should not be going on. But when they meet elderly people, they'll interview them, and if the elderly person can tell them what time of day it is and where their bank account is, and answer a few other questions, they may be able to satisfy the investigator that they're competent.
Right.
Dementia is a very elusive disease, and people can be lucid at times and other times not lucid.
True.
And so it's a gray zone. And sometimes, even though the family's concerned about the well-being, the meeting with the public guardian and trustee really ends up in a letter to the individual and to the elderly person that we've met, and things seem fine to us, and carry on.
Right. So then, okay, so here we are. Now we're frustrated. The cops won't deal with this. They're too busy. The public trustee or the public guardian has determined after a brief investigatory interview that mom's fine. She's quite able to make these decisions for herself. So now there's still this interloper. There's this rip-off artist who's eased into her life, and we're still concerned. So can we go to Hobbs Giroday, Ian, and say, well, you know, there's not an estate yet. Mom is still very much alive and well, thank you. But we're really concerned that, and it's not about the money, but she's being unduly influenced from the perspective of we, her children, to the point where this guy's going to rip her off. And it's not about ripping us off. It's about him ripping her off. Can you do anything for us?
Short answer, yes. I'm not completely comfortable with the sequence. I wouldn't suggest necessarily that a family go to the public trustee before they come to Hobbs Giroday.
Okay, fair enough.
To discuss these issues. I think that the first thing the family should do, and perhaps they would do so with advice from a law firm like ours, would be to try and reach out to the elderly parent themselves and do some investigating on their own.
Sure.
See whether the parent would be willing to discuss their current estate plans, whether it's been changed or not. Go and discuss with the lawyer or their long-term lawyer the circumstances of the most recent will.
Because the kids couldn't go on their own to her lawyer for that conversation because there's a little matter of client confidentiality at play here.
Right, and in fact with the lawyer privilege, and the same issue arises with the doctor. You know,
right.
It may well be that a family meeting with the elderly parent's doctor with the elderly patient, though, of course, because otherwise you're running into the confidentiality issues.
Right.
A visit to the banker. Has there been any changes to the who's on these accounts in the past couple of years?
Right.
How did that come about? So, in some sense, it's you're trying to open the eyes of the elderly parent to be aware that this is maybe not all on the up and up.
Right.
And that he or she may need some protection.
So it would, it's. I think it was wrong for me to assume that Hobbs Giroday, as estate litigation lawyers, really only dealt with the estates of individuals who are no longer with us. In this case, we have some very, very concerned family, children, boomers, but nonetheless, we are her children, who are deeply concerned about the well-being of our elderly parents. So you would take that case then, David, if you felt there was something you could do.
Yes, and I mean, there's other issues that can crop up. There's the Patients Property Act, which is there for when it's necessary to appoint a committee. Requires 2 letters from doctors stating medically the opinion that the person is incompetent either to manage their finances or their person, or both.
Right.
That's the primary evidence that's put before the court. But with it, you apply and appoint a committee, which then takes control of either the financial and or the personal affairs of the patient. So that's a discussion. But quite often, it's not believed that the person meets the test that required by that act, or the opinions are not to that effect.
Right.
The Power of Attorney Act, if there's been abuse of use of a power of attorney, it allows you to take steps to redress whatever transaction was performed with.
So there are legal remedies, and if you're in a situation listening to us right now where you're going, look, this is all resonating far too loudly in my ears here. This is actually happening, maybe not in my life, but in my friend's life. There's this elderly parent who's suddenly got this fabulous new best friend forever, and there's all this stuff going on. Ian, is there any merit? We only got a minute left. This is a bad time to ask you, but is there any merit to the boomer kids approaching or confronting this interloper, this con artist, and looking him straight in the eye and saying, we're on to you, and watch your step?
Might not be the first thing you say to them, unless you've done your investigation.
Oh, yeah,
and you're satisfied that that's the case. You obviously you don't want to get into a heated emotional situation where something bad can happen, but there's if you feel like that will have some good effect, I don't see why not.
Well, I think at the bottom, at the end of the day, David, people who do this, who intrude into elderly people's lives and rip them off, are cowards. And in many cases, when a coward is confronted, they back down.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that your proposition. I think that might be appropriate in some circumstance. I guess what we're all discussing is there's a lot of things to consider, investigate, a lot of possible options, and maybe you do arrive at the point where you decide, well, that's something that we should do in this situation. So I don't think there's an absolute yes or no to that one.
But the best remedy probably is avoid all of that and talk to a lawyer first. Find out if you have some standing, if you've got a case. And I personally recommend Hobbs Giroday. David and Ian, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Law Show.
Thanks, Sterling.
Thanks, Sterling.